Buenos días a todas y todas. De parte de Medallia, España, estamos encantados de recibirles esta mañana en esta 7ª edición de este importante congreso. Es un honor estar aquí junto al DEC. Es un honor saludarlos a todos en esta primera experiencia virtual y llegar directamente a sus casas en donde sea que estén. Hoy realmente tenemos un honor de darle bienvenida al fundador del NPS, Fred Reichheld. Él ha sido el fundador de esta metodología importantísima y una de las mentes detrás de la experiencia del cliente. Y vamos a tener una conversación muy informal y ojalá enfocada en áreas de valor suyas. Vamos también a tomar preguntas de la audiencia al final para poder llegar directamente a él. Queremos reflexionar que estamos pasando por un momento muy duro y enviar de parte de Medallia a ustedes nuestros saludos y a las familias afectadas fuerza y nuestros mejores deseos para una recuperación de estos momentos. Y también queremos dar un tono positivo a este momento. Creemos que la experiencia del cliente es un tema que va a llevar adelante el valor corporativo de nuestras empresas, nuestros equipos y ojalá mejorar el largo plazo de la situación en España. Así que gracias por ser parte de este evento y por favor únanse conmigo, vamos a hacernos un cambio al inglés. Bienvenidos de parte de nuestro equipo de Medallia España. Well, good morning to everyone. It truly is a pleasure to now be able to switch into English in this truly epic day. One of the reflections that we were sharing and looking at in the morning was that today's 7th Congress and edition of the DEC Congress is truly focused on the evolution of customer experience. And we are just truly honored to be able to have one of the most influential minds and thinkers in the space of customer experience and the inventor and creator himself of the NPS. One of the interesting reflections that I heard on NPS in meeting Fred Reichheld over the last 2 years is that NPS has almost taken a corporate strategy as a wildfire. It's truly been adopted by the largest and most complex organizations across the world. So today we're very honored to welcome you, Fred. The team in Spain that are listening to us really range from a variety of companies, clients, industries, and sectors. And I know firsthand how excited they are to be able to finally hear directly from you. So it's a privilege to be able to use this virtual background. It's the first time we're doing this virtually. And we say hello to you all the way to California in this lovely Madrid morning. So welcome, Fred.
Thank you very much, Eduardo.
Yeah, so look, we thought this should be a coffee chat. So we want to, of course, keep it super informal. We're going to have a conversation around your experiences, and then we're going to take some audience questions as we go. I think a great place to start, if it's okay with you, is to go all the way back to the very beginning of the early days of the Net Promoter Score. Can you actually tell us a little bit around what were the conditions of business around you when you invented it, and what led you to create it, to create the NPS?
Well, I had been focused for many years on the importance of building loyal customer relationships and fleshed out the economic advantages and impact of loyalty, which I published in my first book, The Loyalty Effect. What we ran into was the challenge that while, yes, people coming back for more, retention of customers, them referring their friends, them buying more, expanding average ticket and so on, those were the signals of loyalty that were real, but they tended to lag. And so if you wanted to learn in real time what things you were doing in a company and could hold people accountable for doing good or bad in building relationships or destroying relationships, we needed something else. And that's where I needed a real-time survey that could actually ask someone quickly one question. And we tested a number of questions, which ones were the best predictors of these loyalty behaviors that this whole theory is about. And it turned out that the likelihood to recommend was the best gauge, not just of referrals, but of expanded purchases, repurchases, all the good things that happen when you've built a loyal relationship. And it was focusing on one simple question and then an explanation, an open text verbatim, so the customer could tell you why and how to get better. That became the basis of our of the Net Promoter System.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Fred, for taking us back there. One of the interesting things that I think we encounter, and it will be interesting to understand how you dealt with this in the early days. How did you see the reactions from the corporate leadership teams and the C-suite towards this idea of Net Promoter? So you just told us this scoring and reaction from a customer gave you an interesting idea around loyalty. So clear link to value. But how would you say the corporate attitudes towards this idea were at the very beginning?
Well, it was mixed. It depended on where in the company you were focusing. The very senior executives were quite intrigued because they, at least many of them, for many years, had intuitively understood the importance of building loyal relationships and treating people right, but they'd never had a way to measure it and hold people accountable for it. So they liked the idea of a simple idea. I think they also understood before I did how inspirational this metric and this idea is, that when you treat someone in a way that makes them an enthusiastic recommender and refer you to a friend, you're getting someone to co-brand their personal reputation with you. So you've not only made their life better, you've done it in a way that they're proud of and want the world to know more about their relationship with you. And so the C-suites were immediately interested. There was enormous blowback, however, from the marketing and market research departments, who felt like they already knew how to measure satisfaction and they knew customer experience. And they had a mindset that was a much more research-oriented approach where, obviously, if you want to understand someone's likelihood to repurchase, likelihood to refer, you'd ask them 100 questions, and then you'd have a much better prediction instrument. But of course, that's very disrespectful of a customer's time. And if you asked every customer 100 questions every time they interacted with you, you'd never have any time to do business. And yet they really couldn't get out of that mindset that this was really a flimsy, simplistic approach. And so for many years, they resisted it enormously. I think over time, they came to see that it's just practical, and it gets you 80% of the insight, and it happens so quickly that it actually is the best approach that we've discovered yet.
Yeah, and I think that point has, in our discussions often with clients, is an aha moment for many, when we realize that an NPS system is an operational toolkit for the business, and it doesn't replace market research. Market research is a different use case. So actually, why don't we speak about that? One of the things that I heard you say over the years is that using the NPS as a score is a dangerous thing, and you've made an underscoring about this being a system. So can you tell us a little bit around how the score evolved into a system of action?
Yes, it was always a system. The thinking, the initial system I saw that was my inspiration for Net Promoter was something that Enterprise Rent-A-Car was using. They were using this 1 or 2 question survey to a sample of their car rental customers, closing the loop within 24 hours. Anytime there was an unhappy customer, someone from the branch manager would call them, apologize, probe for the root cause, try to fix it. But then there was more. There was a system of how do you get branches to care about that? Well, branches were rank ordered based on their scores, and only those in the top half of the rank ordering were eligible for promotion, either the branch manager or anyone working in that branch. So Andy Taylor, the CEO at Enterprise, had built a system around this score that was very effective. Now, when I introduced the Net Promoter system and score, people grabbed onto the score as if that was where the real value was, and it's not. But what's, I think, intoxicating or addicting is I can hold people accountable to this score, which is a horrible thing to do. Because when you have a survey score, it's a soft number. It's an opinion. people in different personalities give you a different score just because they have different personalities, not because your service was better or worse. And so the score is a great way to increase learning from the verbatim open text, why the score and how can we get better. But instead of hearing what I was saying, too many people heard just the first part of it. They grabbed the score, linked it to people's bonuses. In so doing, I think really almost destroyed the value of the score. And so I've been hammering away on, for heaven's sakes, get this out of people's compensation. Stop making it a way to get in trouble and get back to the truth of it, which is a way to learn how to better serve your customers and create more promoters.
Yeah, thank you for reflecting on this. We were in a meeting with one of our banking clients, and they had called this system for this executive. It was a system of learning. He had said, we have transformed the culture of this organization from a customer, well, almost like he was calling it a whip.
Yeah.
He transformed the behaviors to be more around an agile learning organization where the customer had become the coach of the team and the operations. So that's a fantastic use case. So let me actually fast forward a little bit here from this really interesting evolution of the early days and start looking at the first maybe decade of the century. I am reflecting here on our own co-founders. So Jimmy and Berga, husband and wife, learned about the NPS methodology and its value. And then they decide to pitch to Hilton this idea of creating a software company or software solution that can enable a business to do what you've said, basically capture feedback in real time and then bring the right data to the right user at the right time. So can we actually look at the role that you think that technology has played in the impact of NPS in business?
I think it's played an enormous role. We all now live on our mobile phones and devices. It's just they've become integrated into how we live. And that has made it so easy to ask for and receive feedback in real time in a frictionless way. In the old days, you used to mail, I don't know, if you're probably too young to remember this, but people would mail surveys and then you'd process them and it would be weeks before you'd get any information. And now it's when my son works in an Apple store, and when a customer responds, within seconds, the comment is in his phone, in his pocket. He hears the buzz and he checks out what someone has. So learning is real time. I think technology has had an enormously positive impact. Now, of course, the negative is it's so easy to send out 1 billion surveys that the world is now over-surveyed. And we need to be a little bit more intelligent about how often we send survey requests and getting people to agree in advance that they would be willing to take that's an appropriate use of their time. So I think there needs to be quite a bit of progress on that front.
Yeah. And one of aside from the survey fatigue thing, which is a true problem, I would say, for kind of keeping the trust of our respondents and our customers, it's about also delivering the end-to-end promise. One of the things that I personally learned as I got closer to the NPS system was the importance of the outer loop process. So closing the inner loop of that experience and having a governance around it. Because I sense that, actually, why don't we talk about that? What is the challenge that you have as a brand? If you ask a customer to answer a survey, they complain or promote you, and then you don't follow up. What is your sense about value left on the table there?
Oh, it's a message that you just couldn't care less. Because before you sent the survey, there was some reasonable cover story that the executives didn't know how unhappy the customer was or how they had been abused by a lousy delivery system. Now, with this survey response, they know that you know at headquarters. And when you don't bother to respond, it's such a sign of disrespect that it's worse than if you never asked at all.
Agreed. And I mean, it's really breaking on a promise, in a branding promise. It's actually like a terrible, terrible missed opportunity as well for the business. So, you know, I think maybe before we look at kind of present tense and the recent years, one of the common questions or common challenges that sometimes European executives raise is the following. They say that the US has been incredibly powerful at the mentality that the customer is always right. They say that it's an ingrained cultural element of say, like the culture in terms of how we service customers there, and that Europeans tend to have a different attitude sometimes towards this point. If we were to reflect around your conversations, consultancy engagements with European companies, how would you say that attitudes have shifted over time here?
That's a great question. I have found that this basic notion of treating people the way you would want to be treated, that, I think in religious terms, it was always this love thy neighbor as thyself, but it's not a religious idea, it's a common sense idea. Good communities are based on treating people in a way that makes you proud, something you'd want for a loved family member. That's the essence of good human relations anywhere in the world. I suppose there are cultural things about, service to others is somehow demeaning, and it varies. But I think good leaders in an organization have to get their people to feel like the employee's life is enriched and made more meaningful when they brighten the day of a customer, when a colleague or a customer. But your success as a human being needs to be thought of as how of all the lives you touch, how many are enriched and how many are diminished. And Net Promoter is a pretty good proxy or measure for that. When you touch a life and they give you a 9 or a 10, not with pleading and coaching, but really they would enthusiastically recommend that to a loved one, you should feel great about yourself. You had a positive impact on the world. And just the opposite if they give you a 0. And I think every culture, when it's presented in those terms, wants to do the right thing for customers. Now, something you said, though, I have to respond to. The customer is not always right. There are abusive customers, there are unreasonable customers, and I think the best businesses are finding ways to discipline those outrageous customers and warn them, and if they don't fix it, kick them out. That happens on airlines, that happens on cruise ships, it happens on Amazon Prime. You're in the Amazon Prime Club, and if you abuse you're out. Costco, if you're abusive, you're not allowed to be a member anymore. And I think we should be more thoughtful about this crazy notion that the customer is always right.
I think that's spot on. And it's actually really interesting when we think about the new business model of the marketplace, where the customer receives a rating, right? When we think about activities like Airbnb, where hosts and guests get reviewed on both sides, and that drives quality of relationship, it's more sustainable. Thank you for that. I think it's always been interesting to see the attitude shifting. In Europe, I would say, when I reflect on the projects in Iberia, in Italy, in France, in the UK, I would say now it's a very clear staple. And I think the interesting thing has been that executive teams have decided to take it off the annual, not off the annual report, from the annual report into the operations.
Yeah.
And so, this has been an interesting evolution, right? Because many companies are struggling sometimes to know who should care about customer experience. They often ask us, in your opinion, where should we start putting the attention? At the top of the company with our executive sponsor, in the middle layer with the regional directors and managers, or on the front line? They always ask, where should we start in terms of our approach? If you look at this, where would you advise folks to start thinking about both focus and governance?
Well, I think the only place that you can start is at the very senior levels, because what loyalty is about and what treating people right is about is a set of values and principles on which the business runs. And there's the few things that only the top people in a company can do, maybe just the CEO. They get to decide how they measure success and what kind of behavior in this organization is going to be rewarded and recognized as exemplary. And this notion of treating one another right and recognizing great service to customers in innovative ways to make customer lives better, that has to be something that is reinforced from the very top. Today, most companies, big companies, without knowing it, without intending it, have put systems in place that make people treat each other badly. You know, I talk about bad profit policies and things that are being done to customers that they're just outrageous, and yet they're now, people are immune to them. They're just sort of used to it. But when you return a rental car 5 minutes late and they charge you $100, that's outrageous. When you change an airline ticket maybe 6 months in advance and they charge you $200, they're just highway robbers. It's legal, but it's wrong. Everyone knows it's wrong. And so you have to have a process for rooting out those horrible profit-centric policies and get back to a world where employees and customers can tell you when you're doing something they consider is inconsistent with golden rule behavior, this notion of treating people right.
It's really interesting, the notion of the golden rule, when you actually think of people's silos, right? Because some people will behave according to the world that they see, and it may be restricted by the profit center that is around them. So that's really actually super interesting with something you also mentioned before, which is the point that now we have smartphones and technologies that are blowing up, which also means that we're transacting and being serviced in more than one channel. You have the physical and the digital, basically exponentially growing in terms of number of experiences, number of interactions, and movements of the moment that is most important to you in the journey. So, what is the right approach to get out of the silo into a more holistic view, in your opinion?
Well, I think there are some. I won't say artificial. I'm searching for probably the right word. There's some things that you can do occasionally that help people with their empathy of the different silos and the full customer experience, just by helping the exercise of mapping the entire customer journey and what the episodes are, and getting all the employees and executives to go through that process of imagining what the full customer experience is like. So that's very productive. But then how do you do that systematically every day and remind people? I think the best way is to get people from the senior executives in charge of these silos to listen in to customer service conversations. I think the best companies will have their executives listen in or interact themselves on the web an hour a month, an hour or two. And then instead of just doing that, they actually get together as a team, discuss what they've learned, what they should prioritize as the improvements to make the customer's experience better, and especially to make the frontline teams more able, more competent, have the right systems so that they can delight customers in an efficient way. So I think there's just too little energy applied to what's the inside business process we're going to build to keep our executives and our silos and our service organizations close to the customer experience. Nothing works better. I mean, the verbatim comments are good. Hearing the voice is even better. Video catches even more of the emotion. And I think people change their behavior based on emotional issues much more than rational.
This is so powerful, really, really powerful, because I can tell you, I mean, you've seen it and advise folks, but I would say this is the most frequent challenge that we hear often, which is where and how can I get my executives to better empathize? I think of a global client, an insurer. They launched a transformational program, putting the customer at the heart of the business model. They said that they wanted to be less of a policy manufacturer and more of an experiences company. And in this transition, they would get each of the market CEOs to do exactly what you just described, a monthly huddle with their teams where they would be closing the loop themselves with phone calls. And I think 6 months into this journey, in Spain, they showed to reduce churn in the claims touchpoint by 18%. So, you know, the results of this activity are somewhat sometimes a little bit soft to think about, but when you actually put the governance behind it, they will lead to clear economic results.
Yeah, let me tell you a couple other quick stories that I think might be useful to the audience. Here in the U.S., the highest net promoter score in the credit card business goes to a company called Discover. It doesn't do a lot of overseas business, but it's a very large business in the U.S. Discover has their executives listen in on customer service calls 2 hours every month, gets together as a team, as we discussed, but then they go the next step. They have their bonuses jointly tied to the number of customer complaints going down 10% every year. And so I think you have to, part of the way you can close the loop with the executives and make them care is to make them jointly share a net promoter kind of objective among themselves. So that's the one story. The second is one of the earliest companies to adopt net promoter. Probably the first one after Bain Company, where I work, is Intuit. Now, Intuit is a software firm. It started in financial services and checking, and very big, successful firm. Now they have TurboTax, where I think the majority of people in the United States have their taxes done on TurboTax. So Scott Cook, who used to work with me at Bain, said, Fred, I've got this new process I think you're going to be interested in. We call it Follow Me Home. And so in every one of his businesses, he has his software designers, his marketers, all of the headquarters people. They have to go out on a few of these Follow Me Homes where they get permission from a customer to actually follow them home from the store or watch them load the software on their computer and use it, and just observe them, and then at the end of it, ask them why. Now, as you can imagine, that gets a little harder with the COVID crisis and virus risks. So, but think about the possibility of Zooms and these little GoPro cameras. You can just get your customer to put a GoPro on and then have executives follow them home and watch them use it. And there are so many cool ways with technology to be able to watch the user experience and get much closer to understanding it.
Yeah, and you know, in the evolution of Medallia, I think gladly you're pointing that our direction is the right one. We have, since gone public, increased our R&D clearly, and one of the directions of travel is what we call VVMI, which is video, voice, messaging, and ideas. And it comes down to exactly what you said, which is bring the voice of the customer through video feedback, bring the voice of the customer through speech so that we can hear more sentiment and feelings and actually digest everything in the innovation huddle. So it's really interesting. The Follow Me Home is something I'm gonna coin and use as we advise customers here, because there is nothing that replaces a executive empathy to the customer for understanding the importance of this. So let's fast forward to today. Thank you for mentioning the challenges we have with COVID. It's been an unprecedented, very tough moment for the humanity. And if anything, customer experience and citizen experience and employee experiences are a positive place of focus. Now, aside from the positivity and the fact that it remains a key area for the executive, we now see CFOs rigorously checking budgets and investment lines. So if we were to reflect a little bit on how can our audience and colleagues reflect on financial impact or demonstrate financial impact, where would you direct them to look into for value?
Yeah, first of all, I would not try and do it myself in the marketing organization or the service organization. I would get the CFO's department to do it for me. So, because they have to believe in it. They have to see how it connects to their world, or it's sort of useless. And what I would have every CFO do is take a handful of, for every customer segment that's important to us, take a handful of customers who are who are promoters, we know they're promoters, passives and detractors, and track them through time for a year or two and watch what the revenue growth is, the repeat purchase rate, if they can track referrals, get that as well, and just give me a sense of what kind of economic outcome results from having a promoter. And if you want them to be more sophisticated, to say, and by the way, those are the obvious things I just mentioned, but let's look at loan charge-offs by promoter, passive, and detractor. Let's look at bad debts. Let's look at lawsuits. And you start to see, oh my goodness, so many of these overhead items that were just being allocated based on revenues, they actually have very differential. It's not a peanut butter thing. Most of the costs are going to detractors. And so CFO needs to tell me, so what is it worth to get more promoters and fewer detractors? What would happen to our income statement? And once you get that in a serious effort, I think remarkable things will happen, because if you assign the correct cost of capital to running a business, what you'll find is detractors destroy value in most industries. So it looks like, yeah, they give us revenue. So even though we're sad, they're unhappy, at least we're making our profit targets. We're not. We're bringing in business that is destroying our net present value. And frankly, it's destroying our soul, because we're putting our people in a position where they have to do bad things to people and not fix it.
Right, right. And I think your point is so powerful, because given that a detractor costs you a lot more to serve, and not only costs you more, but also destroys the value with all these litigation claim costs, there's a really big use case around in that detractor feedback, the detractor requirements, and how do you move that detractor into a passive? So I think that's incredibly powerful. And the other point would be, in this moment of such challenges, I reflect on something that I learned from you that is also extremely illuminating, which is the idea of the moment of truth.
Yeah.
And what moments of truth do to long-term loyalty. So if I were to think of an insurer that is receiving a claim from a patient, if I'm thinking of a person that needs salary protection, etc., what is the importance for companies that are doing well to get those moments of truth correctly in the first instance? And what can it do to their finances if they do?
Well, I think, you can't look at everything in the customer experience with equal focus. So you have to figure out what are the subset of moments or interactions that have the biggest bang for the buck. And what I find is they tend to be times when customers or patients feel vulnerable, especially emotionally vulnerable. When someone brings their computer to the Genius Bar at Apple, they are scared that they're going to lose all the family photos that they care desperately about. They feel a little bit incompetent, because I'm an adult, I should know how to work this machine, and so so at Apple they teach their geniuses, it's not about fixing the machine, it's about fixing a relationship. So you have to fix the Mac, and you got to make people feel good about themselves and that they are more competent. So you try and teach them a little bit so those are the ways that you build. I call them wows, but it has to be remarkable. You have to do things that are so unusual that they stick in someone's memory and makes them want to talk about you to friends. And I think being thoughtful about where you're going to search for those and teach your people to watch for, acts, just general acts of kindness cost very little. But in some places, you can afford to invest a lot of money along with an act of kindness, and you will change a relationship forever.
Thank you. And I think the importance of getting that right cannot be lowered. Look, I think we've covered so much ground, and we really thank you for doing this look back in to the past. we're going to go into some audience questions. And before we do, it would be interesting to hear from you where you think you see the CX domain and the customer experience space to go to in the future years.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about that because I'm writing a book that will come out next year. The final chapter is what is the future of this customer movement. I call it customer capitalism because I think the greatest companies that I know of no longer operate on the old rules of financial shareholder capitalism, where the primary duty is to maximize shareholder value. They have shifted to a mindset that I call customer capitalism, and where they think of the purpose that their business exists is to enrich the lives of customers. What I'll show in the book is that by doing that, long-term investors are very happy with the output because the most successful total shareholder returns have been earned by the companies who have the highest customer net promoter scores. So where does that take you? Well, I think number one, CFOs are going to have a deeper understanding of the economic consequences of creating promoters versus creating detractors, and to integrate those financial insights into day-to-day priorities and decision-making. I think we've got to rely much less on surveys and much more on the signals that are out there about whether you've delighted a customer or not, whether it's operational metrics, whether it's what those customers are saying in chat rooms or on the web, ratings pages, as well as what your employees are saying about what they are happy about and unhappy about in their ability to delight customers. So it's going to be much more of a signal-driven learning process. I think maybe the most important shift is getting away from the Net Promoter Score, or whatever score you use, but it's 2/3 of the world is using Net Promoter. I'm guessing 90% will be using it by the end of the decade. But don't make that the objective. A score should not be what you hold people accountable to. The question is, what do you hold people accountable to? And I think that I've finally gotten the answer to that. I call it the earned growth ratio. And what people should be held accountable to is the basic idea that Andy Taylor from Enterprise taught me originally. A great business treats customers so they come back for more and bring their friends. That is something your accountants can track. Of all your existing customers, how much of your growth is coming from that existing book of business? And then for new customers, let's tease them into two different categories. Those that are coming in primarily because of your reputation and referrals from the existing customer base versus those that you've acquired, you've bought essentially through sales, promotion campaigns, advertising. And look at this earned growth ratio is how much of our growth is coming from treating customers right and them bringing their friends versus bought. And as we make that into an audited accounting statistic, I think you'll start to see why Net Promoter is a great tool, because it helps you achieve that which is the true objective.
Well, that also, I think for me, puts it in a much more precise term when we speak about profitable growth, because I guess we start putting the profit centers to the side and we just look at organic growth from the customer base. Great. Yeah. Thank you for those reflections, and I cannot wait for the book, actually. You know, I'm looking at some of the audience questions as we go, and there's one, you've talked a lot about this, but I think it may be really interesting to take a little bit of a step back in the spirit of recapping. The question is, what would you say are the most common pitfalls in NPS deployments you've seen over your career? If you could name the 3 most typical or dangerous ones.
Sure. Number one is linking it to compensation. It destroys the ability of honest dialogue and learning, and it makes employees fixate on the score as opposed to the verbatim comments that are the suggestions for learning. That's number one. And I'm sympathetic. People want to show that they're serious about Net Promoter and this framework. And if you're serious about it, you link it to people's compensation. That's sort of the old school mindset. That has to change. The second thing is very sloppy scores. People, I get Google alerts every time someone talks about Net Promoter, which is getting a little out of control because every day there's dozens. But the talk it's chest beating and vanity statistics about how great we are. Oh, our Net Promoter score is 92%, and that's world class. That's even better than Apple or Amazon. And then you find, how do they measure it? And well, they asked their own customers, and so it wasn't double-blind research. It wasn't benchmark competitive. It was completely biased by the process used to create it, and it's sort of silly. When people know that you're the one who's asking this, I'm from Iberia Airlines, and how likely to recommend Iberia to a friend? Well, the people who bother to take the time to respond to the survey is what drives your score more than anything else. And promoters in most industries have a response rate of 100 or 200% more than the rest of the customers. And so it looks like you've got all these promoters when in fact, no, you just have a lot of promoters answering your survey. And so understanding that, it would be number two. I think number three is the failure to recognize that this is not just about how frontline employees treat customers. It is about the community of accountability that the senior executives have built, and what behaviors are rewarded, recognized, reinforced. To get promoted in this organization and reach power and authority, is that because you know how to sell a lot of stuff and flog a lot of customers to Salesforce to overpromise, or is it because you treated people right and they can always trust you to have their back? That's what Net Promoter is about. It's about a community of accountability to golden rule behavior, where the purpose of the organization is to enrich the lives of customers, and therefore the senior executive's job is to put their teams in a position where they can succeed at that mission. And that's a very different framework than the classic maximize shareholder value that capitalism seems to have drifted toward over the last 20 or 30 years.
Thank you, Fred. I think noted on those, and I think we will actually keep on thinking what the implications will be from following this session. We're going to wrap up, and in everyone's mind is this final question, which is, what role does the employee play here? I really have heard you speak about the power of feedback, for instance, to your son at that Genius Bar, and what that has done for his job and his coach and his manager, let's say. It will be interesting to hear what you think are the opportunities in that, linking of the employee to the customer as a final thought.
Yeah, I think we have to get employees, as frontline employees, to start. We need to think of them as not units of productivity where we want to replace them with digital solutions. In some cases, digital is better for the customer, and that's the right solution. But if you're going to have a human being touch a customer, they need to be thought of as the brand ambassador who is bringing the culture of the company, what it cares about, how it treats people. Those employees have to have that as their primary objective. And when there's anything that is getting in the way of them treating customers in a way that makes them proud, there has to be a way of listening to those concerns and responding to them, so that that those employees keep listening and being innovative in ways to live a life that they're proud of. And that's such a different mindset than most executives have today, which is, how do I get my head count down? How do I not pay them more than we have to? And how do I get them to get more revenues and keep their costs down? Those are obviously necessary, but that's not the goal of the business. The goal is to learn how to delight customers, and to get that group who understands your business to feedback to the executives efficiently through technology the important lessons that need to be learned.
Thank you, Fred. I mean, we have seen businesses that have delighted employees, or let's call it a promoter employee, sell 5 times more than a passive or detractor employee. So the use case in itself sells for itself. So look, it's unfortunate that I have to wrap up. This said, I want to use this time to, on behalf of the DEC, the audience, and all of us at Medallia Spain, to really thank you for your time and say that you have a ticket waiting for you as soon as COVID is lifted to come and see us in person.
Thank you. I have 2 bottles of wine sitting on my table for dinner tonight. One is a Pingus and one's a Pintia. So it'll be a good dinner.
Perfecto. Gracias, Fred. Thank you, Fred. So this concludes this coffee chat. We will welcome your thoughts, and we look forward to having Fred in the future with us in the future. On behalf of Medallia, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Eduardo.